welcome to the Culture Cast. I'm Chris Stashew, and I am joined by the woman who put the Jess Byard and Jess Byard June, screenwriter.
That's
Jess
true,
Byard.
I did.
You did. You put it in there. You were like, I'm fucking here, and we're watching summer camp slasher movies.
Yep, even if they aren't technically summer camp slasher movies.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about Friday the 13th, A New Beginning, otherwise known as Friday the 13th, Part 5.
If the memory of Jason still haunts you, you're not alone. Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning.
Severe trauma at age 12. Brutal self-defense, murder of a psychopathic killer. Boy, they've given him every therapy they can think of. Just wonder his mind isn't fried with all the drugs they've given him.
The mindless, murderous fury that was buried with Jason has been reborn. And suddenly, terror has become child's play. Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning.
So the film is directed by Danny Steinman. It is a three-man screenplay by Martin Katrasser, David Cohen, and Danny Steinman, based off of a story by the first two, not including Danny Steinman. We should mention it's based on characters by Victor Miller, because that guy will do anything to make sure you know that he wrote the first Friday the 13th movie, even going as far.
Look what happened to George Romero.
Exactly.
He did that first movie and then he got nothing, so I don't really blame him.
No, I don't blame him either. No.
Thorough.
But I think he sued Sean Cunningham like last year.
Oh yeah,
something like that.
I think so.
It stars a bunch of people that you've probably never heard of because it's a 80s horror movie. John Shepherd is Tommy Jarvis. Melanie Kinnaman is Pam Roberts. Shavar Ross is the best part of this movie. And it centers around... It picks up where the last film, otherwise known as Friday the 13th, the final chapter. So clearly not the final chapter. It picks up where that one left off with Jason is dead and Tommy Jarvis is going on with his life. Tommy Jarvis was played in the last film by none other than Donatello himself, Corey Feldman. In this film, he is not played by Corey Feldman. He is played by John Shepherd. So before we get into the film proper, Jess, why did you pick Friday the 13th, A New Beginning for this month? Because, like you said, it's technically not a summer camp movie. And
I had anticipated the why on this, because this is not... I mean, I guess it has a cult following now, because what horror movie from the 80s doesn't at this point?
Like, literally every... Like, there's almost at this point, it's like... And it developed a cult following seems to be just like a generic byline on every Wikipedia page for any 80s horror movie.
Exactly. But, I mean, it has gained some following, and I'm just going to be clear and say that it is not my favorite sequel. It's not. It really isn't. It's definitely not my least favorite, that's for sure. But I guess I picked this one for a few reasons. One being that you have never seen, up to now, had never seen a Friday the 13th movie, correct?
Correct. I had seen Freddy vs. Jason, which doesn't really count.
No, I mean, I guess
it doesn't count at all.
In canon, but it doesn't.
It doesn't count at all. I mean, I don't know if Jason X counts either, but you know.
Yes, it does. Unfortunately,
sadly.
So you not seeing any of them, I figured. Well, I didn't want to talk about the first because honestly, what am I gonna say really?
What can any of us say?
That hasn't been said. Yeah. But this one is sort of it's sort of summer camp adjacent in that it's like a halfway house for troubled youths, right? So, I mean, that's basically camp. Like,
well, it reminded me a lot of the third Nightmare on Elm Street, which is, you know, a bunch of troubled kids.
Right, but significantly less entertaining. But
made with less quality. However, this and that film also is canon. This film, honestly, like watching Camp Crystal Lake Memories, which is like a 5-hour documentary about every single one of the Friday movies, also just kind of reading a lot on Wikipedia about it, this film effectively gets retconned in the next film. The way that this film ends, it ends up being completely erased. Everything in this movie is almost like, I would say this is this series' version of Halloween 3. Yes. Almost. Like, it pretty much is. Not even almost. It really is.
I mean, it had the same intentions. Like, they wanted to depart from the Jason Voorhees as a villain storyline, much like they wanted to get rid of the Michael Myers storyline. They wanted to go on and just have I think they wanted to make it into a trilogy of a new killer, which I guess, they
wanted Tommy Jarvis to be the killer.
Right, they say that, like, not in this movie.
Right, they say that numerous times in the making of documentary portion about this one. They're like, we wanted Tommy Jarvis to be the villain. I'm like, well, okay.
Right.
Why?
Why? I mean, I guess because trauma.
Yeah, that's what they say, like, evil gets passed on. Like, okay.
Right, and so you haven't seen any of them. So you didn't see 4 with Tommy Jarvis as a kid, as, played by Corey Feldman. 4 is one of my favorite sequels. I do really love that movie. It's not technically summer camp either. It's more just cabin in the woods that's near Camp Crystal Lake. I mean, to be fair, it's really not summer camp anymore after the second one, I think. So, and that's the thing too. When I initially,
what is it? Summer camp in the next one?
Themes. In part 6, it's...
Aren't there, like, kids?
I think maybe they do... Yeah, I think, actually, you know what? I think you're right. I think they do return to camp one more time.
But it's not like the first one.
No. It's not, like, purely, like, we're going to, we are camp counselors at this...
Right.
Camp Crystal Lake. So, but even in the first, it's not Jason as the killer. So, like, in part 5, spoilers, it's not Jason as the killer. It's this guy named Roy. This wronged paramedic who, after seeing his mentally challenged son axed to death by a 45-year-old troubled youth.
Hold on. The casting is great. How dare you?
The casting is so, in like many of these movies in the 80s and, continue. I guess now they're looking a bit younger, more the age they should look, but in the 80s, you were constantly passing off like 35-year-olds as 18-year-olds. And this is a halfway house for like varying ages, I guess. It's sort of like in Child's Play 3, where it's the military academy, but there's like little kids mixed in with, like 17-year-olds for some reason.
I do want to point out, because we're talking about the beginning of the film where you've got a mentally handicapped person, which is... The portrayal is obviously, it's not great. It's very over the top, and we get it. He's mentally handicapped.
It's very 80s.
Yeah, it's very 80s. However, Vic, who kills him, is played by Mark Venturini, who, for the eagle-eyed fans out there who love Return of the Living Dead as much as I do, he is suicide in Return of the Living Dead.
Yes, he
guy
is.
Who gets his head bitten by Tarman, which... This film he's kind of just done away with immediately. Like, I honestly had no idea what was going on in the beginning of the movie. I was like, wow, that was... I thought it was like a not a dream sequence, but like a hallucination. And that's like, no, he just fucking axed that guy. Like, what the fuck is happening here? Like, holy shit.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, I don't really understand the rules of this halfway house. And do these kids, in quotation marks, live here all the time? Are they just here for the summer? In which case it is kind of like summer camp. Are they, like some of them are orphans, or I guess they're all orphans? It's really unclear because you don't know how old, like some of the, I don't know, students or I don't know, not students, what would they be called? Patients?
Yeah, the Joey is supposed to be someone's son. Like, that's the whole driving force in the movie. And it's like, who knew? How? What? Why? They even say he's a ward of the state at one point.
Yeah. And I mean, Tommy Jarvis so in part 4, Tommy Jarvis has a mom and a sister. I think mom dies in the 4th one. I can't remember for sure, but I know his sister lives, and so I don't know where she's at in this movie. And also, it should be pointed out that this movie jumps ahead 5 years, so it's technically in the future. Like, it came out in, 1984 or something like that?
1985, yeah.
1985, so it's technically like 1989 or 1990 when this movie is supposed to take place.
Yeah. It's again, like, having not seen the prior film, obviously, which is not a problem watching this film, because this film kind of exists in a weird vacuum.
Right.
Like, the character of Tommy Jarvis is the only holdover, and you're made to feel some sort of attachment to him, but he's played so weirdly by John Shepherd, and he's clearly written that way. I mean, again, having done a lot of the background research, he's played that way for a reason. He was cast that way for a reason. Sure, fine. That's the point. But it's so blank and boring that you almost wonder why he's in the movie at all.
Yeah, it's sort of like they put him in there and then they forgot about why. Like, he's not even in a grand majority of the film. And I guess you're supposed to think that he's the killer, so, you don't realize that, I guess. You're not supposed to realize that, I guess, that, you think you're seeing him because you think he's the killer, but then he's not.
Which, like, again, like, why is that even believable that he would be the killer?
I mean, I guess that, again, they're putting on trauma from, like, the past movie when he was a kid and he had to overcome Jason by pretending to be him as a child, because that's what happens in part 4. The end of it is Corey Feldman pretending that he is child child Jason Voorhees, and scares him. So I don't know. It somehow manipulates Jason Voorhees into submission, and then they kill him. Or he kills him.
This movie and the previous movie end the same way, where, like, there's this this idea of maybe Tommy Jarvis is now Jason. I mean, yes. I know that they touch upon in Jason Goes to Hell the whole, like, Jason is like a transmittable thing. It's like the Jason Voorhees monster is actually like a demon. So,
right.
I like that. Right.
That's my other least favorite. That's my other least favorite sequel.
But again, like, knowing and having, like for real, if you watch Camp Crystal Lake Memories, like, you could essentially just watch all the movies without watching them. Like, they explain so much of what's going on. So I know I'm not talking out of turn here, that maybe this somehow is, like, in a weird way, it just kind of worked out. It made sense that maybe Tommy Jarvis, but, like, it doesn't work, because Tommy Jarvis in this film he's a complete waste of time. It feels very much like a film I watched last week, Cheerleader Camp, where it's like, oh, is he the killer because he was having these visions of Jason? It's like, fuck no. I didn't believe for 1 second that Tommy Jarvis was the killer. So much so that none of what happens in the movie, even none of the characters think it's Tommy Jarvis either. Like, no one is like, that's Tommy Jarvis is the killer. Like, no one believes that either. Like, that is never a word that comes out of anyone's mouth in the film.
No, it's not. But we should talk about everybody else in the film, or at least touch on them, because this movie is not a good movie. It can't be mistaken for one, but out of context, so unlike you, I've seen all of the Friday the 13th movies, and I've seen all of them many times. This one is probably one that I've seen maybe not quite as many as others. So it was kind of fun going back to it completely out of context, like, outside of watching marathons or outside of, watching a couple of them at a time where I'm still, like, inundated in the Jason Voorhees world. It was a lot more fun revisiting it in this sort of way, where it's if you take out the Jason element of it, it could be a pretty good, like, C grade slasher movie, you know, like one of the many that came out in the 80s. If it was anything else, it would actually probably it would have been maybe received a bit well, or a bit better. At least maybe not, you know, the second poorest grossing Friday the 13th film of all of them, and that's pretty sad.
Well, and I think you're right. I mean, like we were talking about kind of the comparisons to Halloween 3, this film doesn't benefit from having anything to do with Jason. It actually is hurt by it. Just like Halloween 3 is hurt by having the name Halloween in the title. And again, we know what they were going for now. Halloween 3 has essentially been turned into a classic of the genre, a cult classic. Mm-hmm. Everybody reveres it as such. I mean, I don't think that's outside of the scope of reality to say that it is a good movie. However, it is hurt by the fact that it has the name Halloween in the title.
Right.
Same side of the same coin, you have this fucking movie that really should have never been called Friday the 13th.
Right.
I mean, you could have essentially taken the character of Tommy Jarvis out and just had it be a slasher movie, just a generic slasher movie.
And I think it would have been better received than having that title overshadowing it. But and the reason behind that is because there's a lot of fun to be had in this movie.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of fun in this movie.
Contrived, like, nonsensical killer aside, there's a lot of fun characters going on in here. Like that, I think a lot of this movie, or at least for them, like a lot of the scenes between the various, I don't know, kids, I guess you want to say, throughout this movie.
The word is adults masquerading as children.
Right.
The only one who's a kid is Shavar Ross. Like, he's an actual child.
Right, and so I guess he's only there because his grandpa is there, so I guess that kind of makes sense. So I guess it's not as varying ages as as something like Sleepaway Camp, too. Like, that's another one where I think of, like, weird camp rules where it's like, okay, you have 16 and 17-year-olds here, but also, like, 9-year-olds. It's a weird mix, okay. But, everyone else in this movie is super fun. Like, there's a lot of improv, I think, going on in these scenes, if I remember correctly. And it shows, but I think a lot of it works. And for example, like the Billy and Lana at the diner, the incredibly coked out Billy picking up his waitress girlfriend is just a ridiculous scene altogether. And the thing is with all these ridiculous fun scenes, they're followed up by kills. And unfortunately, this is one where the MPAA started to come down, and so you're not getting as much gore as you should be with a movie with like 22 bodies, I believe it is.
Well, the MPAA, the Camp Crystal Lake Memories documentary should be called Camp Crystal Lake Memories, Fuck You MPAA. Which,
yeah, pretty much.
Which, by the way, I am completely on board with, because the MPAA should, in all sincerity, go fuck themselves.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who watches films as much as you do, as much as I do, as much as any of our friends who are in film or make film, everyone thinks that the MPAA should go fuck themselves. And like you said, this movie got taken out back and beaten with a stick because they didn't want all the racy bits. Like the head bouncing more than once when Junior gets his head cut off while he's riding the motorcycle. They were like, we need to have less bouncing of the decapitated head. Like, who the fuck cares? But yet, let's talk about the fact that
in a Friday the 13th movie,
in a film where there is full on, like, just bare breasts like 3 or 4 times.
A lot, yeah. I mean, that scene with Lana and Billy is she's just sitting in the front of a mirror and just flashes herself and says "Showtime." Like, what? Okay, fine.
And look, Debbie Sue Voorhees was a playgirl. Like, so of course she gets naked. I mean, and again, we go back to this with Cheerleader Camp last week, where you have Terry Weigel, I believe is her name. She's a porn star. She's still working in porn today. Found that out much to my chagrin, just out of curiosity. But, like, that's always been something that permeates horror films in the 80s, was large amounts of nudity. I mean, look, Danny Steinman was known for directing porn.
Exactly.
I mean, he was...
And, like, 2 other fairly decent horror movies. The Unseen is a pretty decent little weird monster movie. And Savage Streets with Linda Blair is the really fun exploitation style movie. But I mean, this movie just kind of effectively killed his career. Yeah. He had, I think it was like some 5 films fall through after he directed this. And then I read, I don't know if this is true, but on the Wikipedia page, said that he had a bicycle accident, which basically ruined his directing career after that. So,
I mean, it sounds about right.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, look, he was kind of well versed in exploitation films. And that shows in this film because there's a lot of nudity, there's a lot of violence, there are a lot of kills. A lot. I mean, I would go on to say that almost every character that you're introduced to dies, except for 3 of them.
Yeah,
no exaggeration.
I think 22 people die in this movie.
Yeah, it is over the top, and look, I like that. I think that's great. I think that really works for the series where you have this weird kind of step back from the Jason character, but unfortunately for the people who made this film, Frank Mancuso Jr. and everybody involved, you don't get to dictate where this goes at some time. At some point in a franchise, you don't get to dictate where the franchise goes anymore, and you don't get to dictate what people find to be the points that they hang on to. And I'm not a huge fan of the fan base dictating things. I get it. I mean, look at something like The Last Jedi, right? I mean, Jesus Christ. It got railroaded into the ground because it wasn't what the fans wanted. And that's can be same said for this film and for Halloween 3. You have these films that exist sideways of the franchise that end up getting overlooked because people are like, that's not what I wanted. It's like, well, we didn't. Right. It's not for you to tell us what you didn't want. And I think that's unfair because, like you said, this movie's a lot of fun. There's a lot of really weird shit in this movie.
It is. That was also another reason I picked it, because I was like, all right, well, Chris likes weird. Because, I mean, if the first 3 are the origin stories of Jason Voorhees, if you will, I guess. And
as much as there is an origin story for Jason Voorhees.
Right. The rest of them are very hit or miss, obviously, and this obviously is not one that would fall really high up on the list. But I think it's interesting, and I think that, like I said, there's a lot of fun characters in here. There's all kinds of different, there's a lot of good one-liners and just funny situations. And you don't hate all of the characters, which is nice and kind of out of the ordinary for movies like this. Like, you were talking about Cheerleader Camp last week. Everybody in that movie is pretty terrible.
Except for, Leif Garrett.
Right.
With his sweet mullet. No, I mean, and again, that is one of the things about summer camp slasher films and slasher films in general that they either, I don't know how to explain it, but if you've seen these movies enough, you know what I'm talking about, where if you care about the characters, you're more invested in the film. If you don't care about the characters, it's just meat into the meat grinder. And this movie, I liked the characters, but the problem is, because it's a Friday the 13th movie, I like the characters, and then they end up just being meat into the meat grinder anyways. And it's like, you can't have it both ways. You have to be a little bit more discerning with who you do and don't kill if you're going to give us some interesting characterization. Because you can't just literally kill everyone.
Just kill everybody.
Literally everyone. Like, the only 3 characters that survive are Tommy Jarvis for no reason other than because he was off fucking around half the movie.
Because they wanted him to come back for at least another movie, and then they're like, well, that's not happening.
Shavar Ross, because you can't kill a child, apparently. And then Melanie Kinnaman, I don't know why. Like, her character, and, like, she sounded like she was a massive pain in the ass to work with. Her character is not much of anything in the movie, really.
No, she's actually one of, like, out of the many, fun, colorful characters, she is not one of them.
No, she is boring.
And, hey, everybody's got to, start somewhere. And, like you said, there's a few actors and actresses in this that are coming from, Playboy backgrounds or porn backgrounds.
She is not one of them, though.
No, she's not. That's very true. But we're not dealing with like, top, actors here. We're dealing with people who are like, I'm just going to do this movie to try and get somewhere. And for her, was this her first role, or was this one of her first roles?
No, this was her fourth role.
Okay, so not too far into her. Well, I mean,
it was her first feature. It was her first feature film.
Okay. So what? TV?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hill Street Blues, General Hospital. She was on an episode of an SNL. So, and the problem is like you said, she's so not well thought out as a character that the fact that she is one of three that survives is kind of a bummer, because there are much more interesting characters like Carol Locatel as Ethel Hubbard, who just, has some of the funniest one-liners in the film, like "Ya big dildo." Which by her account,
Jr.
Yeah, which by her account is ad-libbed. She has an interesting scene with a chicken, which I found to be just... again, Carol Locatel is fantastic in this film. She's super charming as the character. Shavar Ross is pretty great as Reggie, even though his scream is comically high-pitched.
It's piercing.
Even someone like... God, what's the character's name? Demon, played by Miguel Nunez, who, again, another actor from Return of the Living Dead. He's great in the little bit of film, like a little bit of time he's given in the film. Like, everyone is great, and then you've got these people that are just given nothing to do, and it's like, why are we putting so much focus on them? Because Tommy Jarvis is a complete cipher in this film. Like, what the point of his character is?
Does he talk at all?
It's like 4 lines?
Something like that, yeah. It's not a lot at all. Like, it's really... And the lines are super minimal.
That must have been a good gig for John Shepherd to just kind of stare and flex his muscles and stare and punch somebody.
I'm sure... Well, the budget was like $2.2 million or something. I'm sure he wasn't getting paid like boohoo bucks, but he was getting paid enough and probably stoned out of his mind the entire time. So whatever.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. And again, like you said, the amount of characters that are in this movie that are interesting outweigh the uninteresting ones, but the interesting ones are killed off so kind of unceremoniously that they don't end up even mattering. Like Miguel Nunez just gets poked in the stomach with a giant spike. Ethel Hubbard just gets her face smashed with a machete. Like, okay.
Yeah, and there should be a lot more blood. It is a pity that there's not a lot more blood. And in addition to the MPAA, you're not getting Tom Savini working on these either. Like, he worked on the first and the fourth, I want to say.
Yeah, I think so.
And the other ones ended up getting some pretty decent FX people on them, but this one was just so restricted, unfortunately, that we have the highest body count and like probably the lowest amount of blood. Like,
yeah, and also again MPAA, right? Because the character of Eddie gets the horse strap around his eyes, which is
that, and so that's great. One of my favorite kills of like the entire series. That's another like reason this movie is not one of my more hated ones. I like that kill. I think that's a pretty visceral, just it turns my stomach.
That's some Marquis de Sade shit right there. Like that.
Yeah, that turns my stomach. Like, that is a real fucking thing that people like have done to each other, and just whoa.
Yes, people.
Yes.
Again, but like you don't get the full effect of it because it's edited down.
Right.
It's desensitized. Well, not desensitized. It's deblooded. I don't know how the fuck to call it. It's the MPAA just taking the piss out of everything. Like, holy shit.
It's sanitized.
Yeah, it's sanitized. It's sanitized for who? The people that are going to see it that want that shit anyways.
Right. Like you're sanitizing a horror movie for people who are adults, more than likely, and even if they're not adults, whatever. It's
a movie.
It's a fake movie. Yeah, it's very fake, obviously.
But the one thing that we should probably talk a little bit about is Jason in this movie, because Jason, as much as we've talked about how this really isn't a Friday the 13th movie, Jason, in quotations, if you could see me right now, he is in this movie, but not really.
Yes and no, yeah.
Right.
So he, like, in, the way that you tell the difference between who is Jason Voorhees and who is Roy, the angry paramedic, copycatting Jason Voorhees, is the color on the hockey mask. So Roy's is blue and the real Jason's is red. And so Tommy's having these kind of fever dreams, I guess, is the best way to describe them. And with that, he's getting a lot of visions of Jason. And I think it's honestly it was just sort of a way of misdirecting or trying to like push the audience into thinking like, oh, is it Jason? You know, obviously he is here, or maybe it's Tommy dressing up as Jason, whatever. Yes, it's somebody dressing up as Jason, but it's not Tommy, at least not yet. And that's the end of this movie, where Tommy assumes the role that everybody's been waiting for him to assume for 2 movies now, is just, I don't know, it doesn't work. And even I think it doesn't work because it's such the obvious way that they wanted to go, and that it would be so boring if they did that. Well,
and yeah, it kind of comes back to, as opposed to Jason, it's a whodunit, and that's super weird, right?
Like, it's just a straight up murder mystery.
Yeah. Really? Like,
it's just an adult version of Scooby-Doo.
Yeah, or cheerleader camp. I mean, it is really, we don't know who it is. And the thing is, like, when it's revealed that it's not Jason, it's pretty bad. Like,
it is, yeah. It doesn't work. It does not land.
And then you have, like, oh, by the way, Roy, played by Dick Wieand, his son was the mentally handicapped kid at the beginning who's eating the chocolate bars. Like, what? How?
Whose killer, by the way, like, the killer is taken away by the police at that point in time. So I guess Vic is just, like, chilling in a police cell while Roy is murdering all of these kids at this, you know, rehab facility of sorts, and the actual killer is just sitting in jail, like, getting, you know, processed through the law. Like,
so let's think about this for a second, though, because I think we're about to blow the lid off this movie completely. Okay, so the initial conceit of Friday the 13th is that, unbeknownst to Drew Barrymore in Scream, Mrs. Voorhees is the killer because Jason drowned. Okay, because the camp counselors were ignoring him and fucking around doing drugs and screwing, whatever. Friday the 13th, the second movie is Jason, correct?
Yes.
Friday the 13th, 3 is Jason. Friday the 13th, 4 is Jason. Jason ostensibly dies. We know that gets retconned. So Friday the 13th, 5, A New Beginning. You have a character, a child, getting a teenager, fine, whatever you want to call him, getting murdered at the beginning. Similarly to the first Friday the 13th, you have a parent now taking on the role of Jason in costume to take revenge, similarly to Mrs. Voorhees in the first film. Honestly, if you look at it that way, which is probably the best way to look at it, it kind of works. Except for the fact that Dick Wieand isn't given anything to do, and it kind of comes out of left field. That's the biggest failing of the film, honestly.
I agree. Like, there's really this, like we've established, if this movie weren't associated with the Friday the 13th world, it would work a lot better. It would be just a standard slasher movie with a lot of kills and, a lot of sex, and it hits all the points that everybody wants them to hit, and there we go. But because it's trying to shoehorn in this Jason Voorhees aspect of it and wanting, so hard to push Tommy Jarvis into becoming Jason Voorhees, honestly, I kind of like the idea of, like, even though I don't like Jason Goes to Hell, I do think that if they were going to do some trilogy or whatever out of this whole New Beginning series, then they could have just, like, I like the idea of exploring it as, like, Jason's bad energy or whatever you want to call it in that area, like, and just infects susceptible people.
People like that, whose I think, kids get murdered.
Yeah, people who are pushed over the edge in some, kind of emotional way or, traumatizing way or whatever.
Because that circular logic could have worked, because that's what this set up. And, again, if you had wanted to do this, you could have just not had Jason in it. Or not had someone masquerading as Jason. But, like, that same DNA of the original film and the original motivation is there. I mean, look, Sean Cunningham did not make a movie with a supernatural killer. He made a killer who was avenging her son who drowned. Let's not forget that. Yeah, again, much to Drew Barrymore and Scream chagrin, Mrs. Voorhees is the killer in the first film. So, the Jason mask and everything, that is what, 3? That's 3, right?
Yeah, he gets it in 3.
Yeah.
Because he's wearing the bag in the second one.
Yeah, which, by the way, is a much better character design than the hockey mask. The bag is infinitely more terrifying. But Sean Cunningham never made a supernatural horror film about an undead creature who can't be killed until he worked on Jason Goes to Hell. But the big takeaway here is, like, they actually had an opportunity here to make something interesting, and they really dropped the ball.
Yeah, I think they did, but I think that they still try. Like, it's still very evident that there was some trying, I think, behind this, at least from the talent. Not necessarily, Danny Steinman and for some reason, 3 people that it took to write this movie. But I think that, like, the people who were in it and who were watching and following do make it worth it. And I think that they did, really... Most of them, at least, were really at least trying to be into it, and that I think shows.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, again, it's not a. I really am. I'm glad that you picked this film because it's not bad. It's just.
I can tell you that it's probably not one that a lot of people would have picked.
Yeah, but that's what I like you, really, Jess, because you pick shit favorite. That's like what everyone else is gonna pick. Probably what 4.
4
6.
or 7, yeah. Yeah, a lot of people love 6, and I'm not a huge fan, but I like 7.
The one with Dreamy Thom Matthews, another Return of the Living Dead alum.
I just like Carrie versus Jason. It's great.
Oh, what is it, 7?
Yeah.
Yeah, I should probably watch all of them except for Jason Takes Manhattan, because that movie just sounds like a slog, like a total drag.
Yeah, that movie is it's weird because it's like 2 movies. It's half of them, the movie's on a boat for some reason. The Camp Crystal Lake boat that goes all the way to Manhattan, I guess. And then the other half is in Manhattan and like in the sewers. It's really strange. And it is very boring, which is unfortunate. There are a few good deaths, but yeah, I mean, you don't have to. If you're not a completist and you don't feel the need to, you don't need to watch that one.
Well, and like you said when we were talking about something before the podcast, the reason there wasn't more New York was budget.
Oh, yeah, exactly. But
then don't call your movie Jason Takes New York because...
Well, they said Manhattan. They knew they had a shot at one section, but they picked the most expensive section, so I don't know.
And also they shot it in Vancouver, so...
Yeah, exactly.
But that's a completely different film, a completely different story. Possibly for another day.
So was this better or worse than Cheerleader Camp?
I mean, Cheerleader Camp was a piece of shit.
Okay.
Cheerleader Camp, if you want my full thoughts, go listen to the prior Culture Cast, but Cheerleader Camp is one of those films where it was devoid of narrative to a point where I wondered why they didn't just shoot a goddamn porno. This movie has about as much nudity, but like still, I felt the narrative here. There was a narrative to it.
Right, like they're into each other in this movie. Like all of the nudity that's happening is because the people in it want it to be happening, and that's fine. In Cheerleader Camp, it's very staged. Like that whole scene where there's like the girls are all basically like a pride of lions.
You mean on the rocks together? Yeah.
Yeah. Just with their tops off, sunbathing. And it's like, nobody does this. This is all extremely fabricated. Like you can see like the cogs working in the 3 men who put this together.
Well, and let's not forget, I mean, this is the 80s. Men are writing the scripts for these films and probably chortling to themselves in delight as they're like, and then we get to see her boobies.
And I mean,
it's like, oh my God, guys.
A lot of them were, coming out of porn too, like porn directing out of the 70s. So it was kind of like more, narrative driven porn where it's movies with sex rather than just what it eventually became. But so it kind of makes sense that you see them like filter into the horror grounds just because that's an easy in. All you need to do is add some murder onto the sex and then you're good.
It's another disrespectful genre, right? I mean, who cares? Horror's dumb, right?
Right.
I mean, look, I'll be honest with you. When I watch the monsters come on Maple Street, I am watching it for the story. I'm not watching it for the sex. I'm watching it for the story. So storytelling in pornography is not gone, folks. It's still there.
You're in it for the sweet, sweet satire.
Yeah, all I want if I'm fast forwarding through the porno and I don't see a story, why am I watching? You're not investing me in the action at all. And look, again, Friday the 13th in the beginning, it's less porno than horror movie. Cheerleader Camp was more porno than even movie, so...
Right.
But the poster for this movie is pretty cool.
It is. It's a good poster.
I like the poster. The poster draws you in, but, like, again, I think people wanted something and they didn't get it, and it's very much like Prometheus. Like, we wanted the fucking aliens. Like, okay, here's the alien, assholes. Alien Covenant.
Yeah.
Just a complete... just waste of time.
Slasher movie with aliens.
Ugh, and the waste of time. I hate that movie.
I mean, you can't change a franchise that's deep, that deep into it.
No, and we're four movies into this, and they tried to change it. Right. It doesn't work that way. Sorry. Mm-mm. Unfortunately, I applaud trying to do something different, but unfortunately, and maybe if they hadn't had Jason in it at all, that might have been a better approach. But you can't kind of half-ass it with Jason. No. So be like Nightmare without Freddy Krueger. What the fuck are you guys doing? Right.
Which I'm honestly surprised something like that didn't happen along the way. But I mean, I guess Halloween
Freddy and Robert Englund, those are one and the same. I mean, go look at that Nightmare on Elm Street reboot that they tried. That movie failed because it did not have Robert Englund in it.
Yeah, that movie's terrible.
It's also trying to be dark and edgy, and he was a child molester. Fuck you.
It's we figured that, but...
I stand by what I said when we did a podcast over that movie. That movie would have been a lot better if it had turned out that he wasn't a child molester and they had just killed him.
It would be.
Right?
And now he's out for revenge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What would you give Friday the 13th Part 5 out of 5?
Out of 5? I give it a 2.5.
Yeah, we give it a 2.5. I mean, it's, again, having not seen a lot of the Friday the 13th movies, I can't really say, well, this is better than the other ones. You can, obviously, because you've seen them all multiple times. But I can tell you that of the things I've watched this month, this is pretty good.
Yeah.
It's better than Cheerleader Camp.
It's not a bad entry into just the cavalcade of slashers that happened in the 80s. It's not the bottom of the barrel at all.
It is not Cheerleader Camp.
No, and I mean, even to be fair, Cheerleader Camp isn't quite bottom of the barrel, but it's close.
It's very close. It's knocking on the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah, I'd say a 2.5. It's got some rewatchability of it. I've seen it a few times, and revisiting it for this was nice because I like I said, out of context, out of marathons, out of just people just watching a handful at a time. It's nice to just kind of take one that's completely technically out of canon and watch it just as a movie itself. So yeah, 2.5.
Well, and it gives me some lines to steal, ya big dildo and crap my ass. Which is
damn enchiladas.
Yeah, crap. Yeah, just a fucking. You know what it really made me want to do? Rewatch Return of the Living Dead, because fuck, I love that movie.
Yeah, that movie's a masterpiece,
isn't it? So we will take a break and we will play a preview for the next Culture Cast.
Camp Bloodbath is the granddaddy of all campsite slasher films. Max's mom plays Nancy, this shy girl next door.
Nice legs. What time they open?
It's cool you get to remember your mom this way.
At least I get to see her on the anniversary of her death, even if she is being chased by a psycho.
Guys, somebody's coming.
Hey, do you guys know the way to Camp Bluefinch?
Tina. So, we're in the movie.
Oh, hi. What's your name? Max.
Best summer ever!
Anyone want to help me pick some strawberries?
Nope, but I'll give you a hand with those melons. Talking about her boobs.
Writing is so bad.
What is that noise?
It's Billy. He's coming. Everyone who has sex in this movie dies. It's awesome.
No sex.
Run! Wait. Selfie time. Shoot!
How do we get out of here?
Movies like this end when the final girl kills the bad guy and the credits roll.
That's Paula. That's the final girl. We just have to stay with her till the end of the movie.
Oops. I want to know where they keep the hardware. I want chainsaws and big-ass knives, and I want them now.
Guys? What's happening? Why am I colorblind? Am I having a stroke?
We're in a flashback.
I wonder if all this blood is just corn syrup, you know? Like these characters are walking around with just corn syrup in their veins. Oh, no. Oh, God, that's blood.
I know in the movie you're supposed to die, but that doesn't mean you have to, right?
What do we do now? We fight.
What's happening? It's slow motion.
On the next Culture Cast, we are going to be talking about, and by we, I mean literally Jess and I, are going to be talking about the final film of Jess Byard June, which is coincidentally titled The Final Girls. And I'm not overstepping my bounds here and saying this is probably the best thing I'm going to have watched all month.
Yeah, I would say that that's pretty accurate.
And it was made in, 2016?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
It's a couple years old now.
Still waiting on that sequel. Still waiting on it.
Yeah, I mean, if it never happens, fine, because I think that it's, it's a movie that can exist just on its own, and then that's perfectly wonderful.
Yeah, I agree. Until then, until next episode, where can people find you, Jess?
You can find me on Twitter at writer Jess Byard, and that's pretty much where I hang out these days. And you can also find me on many episodes of this podcast and upcoming episode of Mike White's podcast, Projection Booth.
Look at that. You're giving a side plug to Mike White.
I did, yeah.
Oof. He's going to
I'm
love
officially in the network now.
This is the network. Oh, jeez. You can find me on Twitter at casualty_Chris. You can find this podcast on all podcatchers, iOS and Android, on your Zune if you still have one. Also, you can find us over at culturecast.com. Big thanks, as always, to _91 for the intro, outro music for the Culture Cast, and we will catch you on the next one.